Ahoy hoy, shippies. We always hear about how pirates battled at sea, plundered ships and buried treasure, but seldom about the preparations necessary for their high seas expeditions. Neglecting it serves to trivialize this absolutely crucial stage, for without proper planning and prep, any pirate expedition was doomed to fail. In his Buccaneers of America, former pirate Alexander Exquemelin wrote scornfully of younger and inexperienced pirates, thinking their careers would be as easy as picking pears from a tree. Considerable effort had to be placed in the recruitment of men, acquisition of a ship, equipment and provisions, setting up your route, gathering intelligence about your target, and, if you didn't want to get hanged, some sort of legal paperwork or justification for going out and stealing. All of this will be tackled within this episode. How pirates prepared for pirating. Of course, pirates during the Golden Age fit within a broad legal spectrum, and their status in society defined how they would equip and prepare an expedition. On the upper end of the legal spectrum, European privateers needed high-quality vessels, supplies, provisions, and legal backing. Not only requiring men to crew the ship, but also administrators, dock workers, and a lot of paper, pen, ink. On the other end, there were the lowly buccaneers of the Hispaniola coast, who often just went out at night in small canoes, stealing a small Spanish ship as it lay anchored. Most expeditions fell somewhere in between these two extremes, and therefore, this video will try to tackle this general rule. But you can expect that some crews would have omitted one or more of the presented stages, depending on their circumstances. You might think that the most important part was getting a ship. Without a man to crew it, a ship was nothing but a pile of wood, and any would-be captain would first have to be concerned about getting a crew. Potential pirates would join or not join a captain based on his skill and experience as a commander, sailor, and fighter, in whatever order they prioritized. And being better at one might balance out being worse at another, or the opposite. But even if a captain had no reputation, sailors could join him for a bunch of different reasons. Maybe he owned a ship, maybe he promised a higher payment than usual, or he had a commission, that is, some sort of permit allowing him to go and plunder. More on that later. There was also the matter of who was to be captain. If he had a commission or owned a ship, it was decided, but if the crew got started from nowhere, they would elect one among themselves as captain based on his merit. But how did pirates actually go about finding recruits for their expeditions? They would have to announce it. Taverns were absolutely crucial, as they were meeting places for all maritime sorts, and a mill for rumors and word of mouth. Word of mouth was the most effective method of recruitment, and gossiping was essentially the social media of the past. People did it a lot, and if a captain was looking for a crew, it would be known around town on the day of his arrival, sometimes even before. A captain might attempt some deed of bravado to spread his reputation, such as fighting and winning a duel. This might be especially relevant when competing over potential recruits. Every tavern in town would have a wall plastered with all sorts of posters. These included songs, advertisements, and recruitment notices for ship crews. These might include the ship's articles, a type of document drafted between a captain and ship's company, agreeing on various disciplinary rules and their payment. By posting these in the tavern, they served as a recruitment poster. A sailor could then read and decide if the rules and payment were favorable to him. Notices could also be published in newsletters. Sailors would actively search for ships to join, and would ask tavern keepers or fellow colleagues for enterprising captains. To be inducted into the crew, they would have to sign the articles. Pirate crews usually had some deliberate ritual, in which the recruits swore to uphold the articles on a Bible, a skull, or cannon. Captains could find other ways to acquire more men. It was common for the Navy to press gang sailors, either kidnap or lure them aboard from port, or even force merchant or privateer ships to give up a few men. Pirates and privateers wouldn't do it so much, at least not in port, they would more commonly force men from stolen ships. Indentured servants or even slaves could be promised their freedom by joining the crew, and if a sailor had run up a huge tab at the local tavern, it was common for a captain to pay off his bill, essentially buying him free. A quick interlude before we go on. Gold Gunpowder is always struggling against the stream of the YouTube algorithm, and is dependent on viewer support for its continued survival. If you enjoy this content, liking the video and leaving a comment will ensure that the video spreads to more people. I also hear from my viewers that the videos do not show up in their feed. You have to click the subscribe button and notification bell to get pings about new releases. You can also join the Discord server where you get notified of new uploads, or simply check out the channel every Friday. I release videos on a weekly basis. The best way of supporting Gold Gunpowder is by becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. For just $1 a month, you'll get ad-free access to weekly pirate content, mounting up to hours of monthly entertainment. Now, if you ask me, that's a pretty good deal. Let's get back to our regular program. After the captain had assembled a crew, he needed to get some sort of seafaring vessel. This could range from a small boat or canoe constructed by the crew themselves, purchased or stolen, to a larger vessel of any kind. Unless the captain already owned it, acquisition would be difficult. Pirates might go from a smaller vessel and steal a bigger one, or acquire a proper ship by mutiny. Another route of ship acquisition was by investment. Wealthy individuals, be they aristocrats, planters, or merchants, would seek out experienced captains and propose to buy them a ship and equipment if they could go out and cruise. The investors would then get a cut of the profits. Cruising back then did not mean a leisurely trip on a pleasure craft, but the act of sailing with the purpose of finding and capturing enemy ships. The investors would also assist the captain in acquiring a commission. I'm using the word commission here as an umbrella term for a vast array of documents that could legally justify the pirate's capture of a ship. These ranged from commissions for a private man of war, letters of marque, letters of reprisal, or let passes. A commission for a private man of war, often shortened to Privateering commission, was essentially a mercenary contract that allowed a ship owner to attack and capture certain ships. Most commonly, they were vessels of belligerent nations during wartime, but could also be given for pirate ships or even Native American tribes. But a commission could also include more peaceful objectives, such as reconnaissance, commerce, or the recovery of a shipwreck. Commissions often had multiple objectives. A letter of marque was given to merchant ships during wartime, allowing them to capture enemy ships if they got the opportunity. Merchant vessels in the period were often heavily armed, and some could double as hybrid privateers and merchants, and known as letter of marques. Letters of reprisal were a form of legalized revenge. If an enemy nation had wronged you in some way, the letter of reprisal allowed you to attack their property and claim recompense. Now, the word privateer didn't appear until the 1660s, and that was because of the ambiguous legal status of the Caribbean pirates employed on a large scale by the English after the conquest of Jamaica. The rules of what defined a privateer and a pirate were continually ironed out during the 17th century, and the line between them was therefore ambiguous, especially in the Caribbean, where colonies were in a near-perpetual state of conflict, and government officials even more corrupt than back home. Distinguishing between them is therefore difficult and not really worth it in the grand scheme of things, but as a rule, pirates would call themselves privateers and strive for some sort of legal backing, if only to get access to ports, provisioning, and staying out of jail. This meant that they would basically use any document to justify their actions. A let pass was a simple license to hunt, fish, or collect dyewoods, but pirates would use tiny clauses allowing for self-defense to encompass blatant robbery, or fish to imply, well, not throwing out a literal net and not looking for actual fish. With a small influx of cash, the pirates would not only acquire a ship, but also the equipment necessary for the expedition. This included repair materials, artillery, small arms, and ammunition. Artillery would be considered part of the ship itself, and purchased with the investment. Same for the ammunition, powder and shot. Small arms, that is, muskets, pistols, and cutlasses, were a bit more difficult. Some captains would buy them for their crew, others expected each man to supply his own weapons, and even ammunition. Here they could also look into the luxury of acquiring special crewmen, that is, artisans able to contribute with an essential skill. The ones that I can think of that were the most important were the cooper, surgeon, carpenter, and navigator, alias Master. The cooper is very underrated. He was the man responsible for assembling and maintaining the ship's barrels. These were used for storing basically everything from cargo to provisions, including food, water, and liquor. No barrels, no food, no expedition. If a barrel broke and there was no cooper to fix it, the expedition could be doomed. And his expertise was therefore essential for any cruise expected to last for more than a few days. I did upload a video on the cooper, so if you want to learn more about his craft, you can check it out after this one. Or whenever you want, I'm not your mom. Piracy was a dangerous profession, likely to result in men getting wounded or even just succumbing to various diseases. A surgeon was needed to supply the crew with medical treatment and keep them in good health. Just how the surgeon tended to the well-being of the crew, the carpenter maintained the health of the ship, switching out flesh for wood, but using perhaps the same saw and similar methods for patching up. Carpenters knew how to plug leaks during combat, repair the ship after it, but also how to safely clean and keep it in top trim. The master, or navigator, was an especially skilled sailor who knew everything about navigation and steering a ship. In most pirate crews, they served as an officer, subordinate only to the captain. However, their skills could more or less be supplanted by experienced crewmen. Gathering provisions was a whole other issue. A ship was typically stocked both with fresh food and preserved food. The fresh food was expected to expire within a few weeks to just a couple of days, ranging from fish and meat to fresh fruit and vegetables. Preserved foods were those that lasted longer, including rice, dried maize, flour, ship's biscuit alias hardtack, salted beef or pork, or a type of smoked pork, similar to modern jerky, known back then as barbecue or boucanet. Fresh items could always be restocked, and pirates often traveled on voyages short enough to not have to dig into the preserved items. Food could either be purchased, but it could also be stolen in preparation for the expedition. A smaller boat and contingent of men could be sent out to attack an isolated farm or settlement, to steal its produce or a handful of animals. These would then be butchered and cooked, usually into the aforementioned boucanet, a Caribbean creation popularized by a group of piratical hunters called buccaneers. Indeed, hunting was a common means of acquiring food for the expeditions. Pirates could also decide if they wanted to team up with another crew, joining into a so-called concert ship. This would strengthen the expedition and allow them to take on beefier targets. It also made it easier to spot, locate and pursue targets, but they would have to agree on how to divide plunder, not always an easy task, and disputes would often erupt, though seldom turning violent. Concert ships would also have to agree to signals in order to communicate, and avoid various mistakes, friendly fire or enemy ruses. In some cases, new signals were devised every week to prevent the enemy from learning them. Signals could be quite complicated, involving raising and lowering the sails in a certain pattern, flying various flags, and firing guns. When the crew had been mustered, articles drawn up, ship equipped and provision gathered, the pirates had to plan their expedition. This was an intensive process that could take up to a week, with every possibility being taken into consideration, even if the plan seldom went as planned. It had to be conducted under utmost secrecy, lest it leak out to the enemy, and their intentions determined everything. How many supplies, weapons and ammunition they needed, or possible places to repair and restock. The pirates needed to decide if they wanted to search for a specific ship, or just any ship in a particular area. That was besides the information they needed about the region they would operate in. Intelligence was crucial for the successful planning and execution of a cruise. Just about every tiny detail was collected. Shipping routes, wind and weather, navigational hazards, local customs, and sites at which to provision and careen. Intelligence of targets and prices was likewise gathered from prisoners, and 17th century pirates became such experts at interrogation and intelligence gathering that the governments of the West Indies became reliant upon them for collecting knowledge on the Spanish enemy. Their numbers, equipment, plans, anything military related, but also the civilian and geographic. Pirates could draw up maps and descriptions of islands or coves to use as bases, dangerous geographical features, and so on. It was one of the reasons why the buccaneers were so crucial to early Anglo-French colonialism. Such information could be found in written sources. They combed through documents such as wagoners, charts, pilot books, letters, certificates, papers, cockets, often acquired from previously captured ships. It was common for them to read the published account of other rovers and explorers. The books of Buccaneer William Dampier, describing his piratical voyages to South America, were used by privateers Woodes Rogers and Edward Cook. Their journals in turn were then used by privateer George Shelvocke. Written documents aside, people were the primary source of intelligence. Woe betide any unfortunate soul to be captured by these cutthroat scoundrels, as they'd be subject to an uncomfortable elicitation. The threat of physical violence and torture was always present, be it directly or indirectly, and many would undoubtedly give their answers before torture was actually needed. The problem with torture as an interrogation method is that it often has the tendency to extract what the interrogator wants to hear, whether it is actually true or not. In some unfortunate cases, the pirates couldn't handle the truth, and might torture or murder someone for delivering information contrary to the pirates' ambitions. Most famously, John Watling executed an old man for telling him that his target was too well defended for the pirates to realistically assault. After this cold-blooded killing, the other prisoner just told Watling what he wanted to hear. Watling then assaulted the target and got killed. That is one of the problems with human intelligence gathering. Both the interrogator and the interrogated are, well, human, and subject to human faults. Prisoners were expected to answer a lengthy questionnaire. The pirates would inquire about everything from the enemy's strengths and weaknesses, lookouts, landing sites, hideouts, racial dynamics. However, this information could also be gained from people friendly to the pirates. These included other pirates, sympathetic merchants, even navymen, smugglers, the vessels of neutral countries, native peoples, fishermen, hunters. Even slaves could be promised their freedom in return for information or guidance. Friendly Spaniards were especially valuable, many of them engaged in the contraband trade, or otherwise open to bribery. Shelvocke noted that Spanish governors were especially inclined, since they only held their post for a few years before moving on. Pirates would often seek to acquire a guide, someone who could guide them to a targeted ship or location. This might be a sympathetic merchant or a pirate veteran knowledgeable of a certain region. Guides were naturally enticed by payment, in some cases, revenge. A great many of the guides deployed at the sack of Veracruz had lived in the city, some being former slaves, others captives of the Inquisition. One had a bone to pick with his ex. Of course, guides were often kept against their will, and their enticement might be a threat of violence or violence against a loved one. In one especially tragic instance, recorded by William Dampier, a Mexican woman and her 4 children were kidnapped. She used as a guide to lead them to various targets. After the pirates were done with the woman, they let her and all of her children go, except for her 8-year-old son, whom Captain Swan decided to keep for his own dubious purposes. The woman was, understandably, crushed. We can see it portrayed in this period woodcut. Most rovers and mariners seem to have maintained active intelligence networks, consisting of spies and lookouts placed in a variety of ports, ranging from dock workers, prostitutes, fishermen. Their information could range from sighted ships to something overheard in a discussion. Many languages were spoken in the Caribbean, and a clever spy could get by pretending not to understand the language of his target. Prior to his attack on Príncipe, Cuba, Henry Morgan kept a Spanish prisoner too close during a council meeting, thinking that he knew no English. The prisoner did, overheard the plan of attack, escaped, and spilled the beans. Basic knowledge of Spanish was crucial in the Caribbean, and though most sailors knew at least a few words of it, the best pirates kept one or more linguists close at hand. But considering the diverse nature of ship crews back in the day, it was probably not difficult finding someone who spoke whatever language was needed, be it European, Asian, African, or American. The pirates themselves could also act as spies and intelligence gatherers, developing clever disguises and cover stories. Howell Davis is one notable example, often dressing up his men and posing as either merchants or navymen to mingle among Portuguese officials. One set of instructions to Caribbean privateers recommended that if a crewman sent ashore as a spy was discovered and interrogated, he should say that he was a boatman seeking partnerships to go fishing. One of the most detailed accounts of privateer espionage ever documented was an instance when a captain himself, John Dublé, disguised himself as a common sailor and landed in Plymouth, England. He inquired from the English about Dutch vessels ready to sail, and conversed with a father and son he was familiar with. They told him of a richly laden Dutch ship, a large pinnace. The pinnace had a lot of guns, but most of them could not be used since she was overloaded with cargo, and the crew was small. The father gave him the whereabouts of the ship, Saltish, and here Mr. Dublé met with the pinnace's captain, John Stam, whom Dublé had previously drunk with in Portugal. Stam did not recognize him. Inventing a long-winded cover story and telling the captain that he needed passage back home, Stam gave him additional information on when and where they would sail. With this intelligence, Dublé was able to execute the capture. It is quite an amazing story. When the plan had been struck and preparations made, the pirates had to wait for the tide and a good wind to pick up. Ships could simply not leave whenever they wanted, it was for the weather to decide. When it so blessed them, they cast off to find their fortunes, hoping that everything would go according to plan. It seldom did. In the next part of this series, we'll be learning all about how they searched for targets, pursued them, and what happened when they caught up. Until then. There has been some interest in my consultation for creative projects, so if you wish to hire me for your novel or game design or whatever else, I have set up a Fiverr account where you can hire me. I offer research, proofreading, editing, critique, very harsh critique, but we can also just talk, spitball ideas, or whatever other suggestions you have. You'll find a Fiverr link in the video description or pinned comment below, or you can contact me via Discord or email. Otherwise, support Golden Gunpowder by liking, clicking the subscribe button and bell to get notified of new releases, and if you truly enjoy this content and have the resources, nothing helps more than $1 a month via channel membership or Patreon subscription. You'll also get early, ad-free access to weekly pirate content. Ooh, now that's a killer deal if I ever saw one.